Welcome back to Dark Scary Stories. Today, I want to share with you a chilling tale about a village that doesn't exist, or at least it shouldn't. This is a story based on real accounts from explorers and locals who ventured into the depths of Eastern Europe. What they found there defied all logic and reason. Stay with me as we uncover the mystery of Mirska, a place that exists on no official map, yet leaves a permanent mark on everyone who dares to visit. If you're brave enough, let's begin. The hiking trail map was old, purchased from a flea market in Warsaw for just a few zloty. Marcus had found it among dusty boxes of forgotten memorabilia, and something about it intrigued him. The map showed a region of eastern Poland that he knew well. Forests, rivers, small villages marked with careful handwriting. But there was one location circled in red ink with a single word written beneath it: Mirska. He had never heard of Mirska, despite hiking these woods for over 15 years. Marcus was thorough. He knew every village, every hiking route, every landmark within 100 kilometers. Yet this place, according to the map, should have been right in his backyard. Marcus decided to investigate. On a cold October morning, he packed his backpack, checked his GPS, and headed toward the coordinates marked on the old map. The forest was beautiful that day, golden leaves falling like snow, the air crisp and clean. He felt the familiar excitement of discovery, though he told himself it was probably just an abandoned settlement or a place that had changed names decades ago. The walk took him 6 hours. He followed an old logging road that was barely visible anymore, covered in moss and fallen branches. As the afternoon wore on, the forest seemed to change. The trees became denser, older somehow, though Marcus couldn't explain why he felt this way. The birdsong faded. Even the sound of the wind seemed muted. Then he saw it. The village appeared suddenly, as if emerging from fog, though the day was clear. Marcus stopped walking, his heart rate accelerating without reason. Before him lay a cluster of buildings, maybe 30 or 40 structures arranged around a central square. They looked old, perhaps from the early 20th century, with weathered wooden walls and sagging roofs. But what struck Marcus most was the complete and utter absence of color. Everything was gray. The wood was gray. The sky above the village seemed gray. Even the earth was gray, as if he had suddenly stepped into a black and white photograph. He checked his GPS. The device flickered, unable to establish a signal, then displayed an error message: location unknown. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn temperature. Against his better judgment, he approached the village. The buildings seemed to lean toward him as he walked, like they were curious about this intruder. There were no people visible, no signs of recent habitation, no smoke from chimneys, no animals, no gardens. The windows of the houses were dark but not empty. It seemed like they were watching him. In the center of the village stood a church. It was the tallest building, its steeple pointing at the gray sky like an accusation. The doors were open. Marcus felt a compulsion to enter, though every instinct screamed at him to run. He climbed the wooden steps. They didn't creak, which somehow made it worse, and stepped inside. The interior was impossibly vast, far larger than the exterior suggested. The pews stretched into darkness, and the walls seemed to extend upward infinitely. At the altar stood a statue of a saint, but something was wrong with it. The carved wooden face was too detailed, too realistic. The eyes seemed to follow him as he moved. Marcus realized with horror that it wasn't a statue at all. It was a corpse, mummified and posed, dressed in ancient priestly robes. He ran. Marcus burst out of the church and kept running. But something terrible had happened. The village had changed. The buildings now formed a maze, and paths that had been clear moments before were blocked by walls. He ran from street to street, each one identical to the last, each one just as empty and colorless and wrong. The gray sky pressed down on him, and he could hear something now, a sound like whispers, like thousands of people speaking just below the threshold of understanding. After what felt like hours, though his watch insisted only 15 minutes had passed, Marcus found the edge of the village. He burst through a fence and ran into the forest. He didn't stop running until sunset, when he finally collapsed by a stream, gasping and sobbing. He made it back to civilization 3 days later, dehydrated and suffering from hypothermia. When he recovered, he tried to find Mirska again. He contacted local historians, checked old maps in the provincial archives, interviewed elderly villagers. No one had ever heard of the place. There was no record of a village named Mirska in that region. No historical documents, no folklore. But Marcus wasn't alone in his experience. Over the following months, he connected with others online, posting his story on hiking forums and paranormal websites. Responses came slowly at first, then with increasing frequency. There were others who had found Mirska. A woman named Katarzyna described seeing the same gray village, the same silent streets. A man named David reported finding the church and the corpse of the saint. An elderly man who refused to give his name wrote, "I found that place in 1987. I saw things there. I can't talk about them, but you need to know, do not go back. Do not ever go back." Marcus tried to burn the old map, but he couldn't. Every time he placed it in the fire, it wouldn't burn. Eventually, he locked it in a box and buried it in his garden, trying to forget. But he couldn't forget. None of them could. The phenomenon became known among certain circles as the Mirska effect. The way the village seemed to move, to hide itself, to reveal itself only to certain people. Some theorized it was a pocket dimension, a place that existed slightly outside of normal reality. Others suggested it was an undiscovered ghost village, a place where some terrible tragedy had occurred so traumatic that it left a permanent scar on the world. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A researcher named Professor Anna Kowalski became obsessed with Mirska. She spent 2 years tracking down every person who claimed to have found it, documenting their experiences, looking for patterns. She discovered something alarming. Everyone who visited Mirska reported feeling watched. Everyone brought something back, a sense of dread, a recurring nightmare, or occasionally, a small object they didn't remember collecting, a gray stone, a piece of wood. Once, a woman found a photograph in her pocket of a house she recognized from her visit, but in the photograph, the house was breathing. Professor Kowalski decided to attempt a proper scientific investigation. She organized an expedition with 4 volunteers and enough equipment to establish a mobile lab. They were never heard from again. 3 weeks later, search and rescue teams found the abandoned camp. The equipment was still there, the tents intact, but the 5 researchers had vanished without a trace. The only unusual finding was in Professor Kowalski's research journal, the last entry written in shaking handwriting. "We found it again, but this time we weren't looking. It found us. It's not a village. It's something wearing a village, like a mask. And now it knows about us. Now it knows we know." The journal ended there. Marcus received a visitor one winter evening. It was a man he didn't recognize, dressed in clothes that looked decades out of fashion. The man handed him a photograph without speaking. It showed Marcus's house, but in the image, the sky was gray, and the trees were bare, and Marcus was standing at his window, his face twisted into an impossible expression. "It's not finished with us," the man said. His voice sounded wrong, like it was coming through water. "It collects us one by one. Everyone who's been there has been marked, and it keeps trying to complete something. We're missing parts of something it needs." Then the man was gone. Marcus never saw him again. Now, months later, Marcus has started experiencing strange occurrences. When he looks in mirrors, sometimes they don't reflect his face. When he sleeps, he dreams of gray streets and silent buildings. And worst of all, he's started finding his own hiking maps in places he's never put them. And on each map, another village has appeared, circled in red, with a single word written beneath it: Mirska. The warnings have started appearing in online forums more frequently. A pattern has emerged. The village is growing. New structures appear in accounts from recent visitors. The population, according to the witnesses, is also growing. Shadowy figures now appear in windows, though they move wrong, like their joints bend in directions human joints shouldn't bend. Some theorists believe that Mirska is a living entity, a consciousness that exists in the liminal spaces between forests, between maps, between reality and the space that shouldn't exist. Others believe it's a prison, a place where something ancient and terrible was locked away, and that every visitor weakens the seal. The most disturbing theory comes from an anonymous poster who claims to be a descendant of the people who originally built Mirska in 1847. According to this account, the village was constructed as a ritual, a deliberate location placed between worlds as part of an ancient practice. Something went wrong during the ritual. Something got trapped. And for nearly 200 years, that something has been trying to get out, using the village as a lure, collecting visitors, experimenting on them, trying to understand human form and consciousness, well enough to wear it like a suit and walk among us. This poster's final message before disappearing from the internet was simply, "If you find Mirska, do not enter. If you enter, do not stay. If you stay, do not look. If you look, do not leave. And if you somehow escape, understand this: you never really did. Some part of you is still there, walking those gray streets, and it's looking for the rest of you." Marcus still hikes, but not in the same places. He has started noticing something terrifying. The forest itself seems to be changing. More and more hiking trails lead to places they shouldn't, places not marked on any official map. Local hikers have reported finding several new villages in the area. Villages that seem to exist in a state of grayscale. Villages that aren't listed in any official record. The phenomenon is spreading. What began as a mystery of a single impossible village has evolved into something far more sinister. People are starting to suspect that Mirska was never alone. The old map that Marcus found at the flea market? Subsequent searches have found over 40 similar maps in collections across Europe, each one depicting a different village, each one circled in red. Each one, when coordinates are carefully examined, seems to cluster around ancient ritual sites, locations connected to folklore and legend, places where local populations have traditionally reported strange occurrences. Professor Kowalski's research, pieced together from her scattered notes that somehow made it back to civilization despite her disappearance, suggests that there are at least 30 such villages, possibly more. And they all seem to be connected, forming a network of impossible places, existing in the spaces between maps, between countries, between moments. The most recent report came 3 weeks ago from a hiker named Stefan. He was found at a hospital, suffering from severe psychological trauma and unable to speak coherently. When he finally managed to communicate, he described finding not one village, but dozens, all interconnected by vast underground tunnels carved from gray stone. He said the walls of the tunnels were covered with drawings, millions of them, showing the history of something far older than human civilization. He said he saw the thing that lived in those villages, and that it was so vast he could only see small portions of it. A hand here, a section of what might have been a face there, always incomplete, always reaching, always trying to pull itself into our world. Today, new maps are still appearing. They are showing up in antique shops, in libraries, in attics of old houses across Europe. Some researchers believe this is intentional, that these places, these villages that shouldn't exist, are advertising themselves, trying to attract more visitors, more specimens. The question that keeps researchers awake at night is simple but terrifying. Why? What could possibly be ancient and powerful enough to create pocket dimensions disguised as villages? And what is it trying to do? Is it trying to escape? Is it trying to understand us? Or is it simply collecting, experimenting, learning, slowly preparing for something none of us can comprehend? If you're hiking in rural Eastern Europe and you find yourself on a path that seems wrong, on a trail that doesn't match your map, if the sky suddenly becomes gray and the colors drain from the world around you, remember Marcus's story. Remember Stefan's warning. Remember the advice of those who came before. Do not enter the village. Do not walk its streets. Do not look in its windows. Because somewhere in those gray streets, in those empty houses, in those impossible places that exist between the maps, something very old is waiting. It has been waiting for centuries, and it is still waiting for you. Some maps show villages that don't exist, but they exist just well enough to find you.